שיש בהם יראת שמיים ויראת חטא חיים.
Either Polish, German, whoever they were, they saw it, Ukrainian, they saw that she keeps some, maybe keeps somebody, because he cooks sometimes. So they suspected it, and they told Gestapo, go and look for Jews in that house. So they took a dog, and they went with the dog to her house to look for us. And my name is officially Josephine. They call us, you know, Yuja or Jessie. I was born in Poland, eastern Poland, Lwow. I was the only child. My mother was only daughter. She was born in eastern Poland, and she met my father, and they moved to Warsaw. My father came, his name was also Auerbach, but his name was Zauberman. And he came from Tarnopol, which is near Lwow. My father was in that Austrian army in 1918, and he joined the Polish army, and he was the only Jewish man with the Polish army that was accepted by Piłsudski to work with him together. They knew he was Jewish, he did not hide it, because my grandmother was traditional. Then he worked with professionally with the Ministry of Poland in Warsaw. They took him to Warsaw. We had a nice apartment in the middle of Warsaw. I was going to school, to public school, and I was the only child, as I said. And I was really not pampered really, but I was the only one. So we were going each summertime to my grandmother. She was in a small town near the other dorf, they call it, countries around her, but it was not a large town, right beside Lwow. I remember that the war happened suddenly. My father was very upset. It was coming through already. We heard the antisemitism. We heard the terrible antisemitism before the war in Warsaw. It didn't affect my father nor me. But we heard it around us. I knew about it. But I didn't pay attention much to these things. And then when the war broke out, it happened in one day. It started bombing Warsaw. We went on a train and out of Warsaw. That's where we left. They took you some clothing, some money probably, something, whatever they could, they took with them. But we left all the furniture in beautiful furnished apartments had to be left alone. I wasn't so frightened yet, but I was very unhappy to leave everything behind me. I had to pack quickly all my dolls, all my private children's possession, and on the train right away and go south. When the war broke out in 1939, my father had to go with the whole Polish army because he was sort of officer in the Polish army, but he worked in the Ministry of War. And my father went with all the Polish army out east, and he was offered to go to London, England, with all the officers. But my mother didn't want to leave her mother and the place that she was born, so he stayed in Poland. So he came back and stayed with us in Poland. because the Russian army came at that time. So we were free for 2 years. He could have come back. It was in Germany. Germany only came in 1941. It was from 1939 until 1941, which we were staying with my grandmothers. Oh, there was a big house. We had where to stay with them because I used to come in the summer times to her anyway, so we knew where we were going. It wasn't strange to me. Next, I remained there, and I was staying with my grandmother for 2 years. I was going to school, very nice school. I was very happy in school because it was free. The Soviets were there, so I was learning Ukrainian and Russian and Polish, everything. So I learned very well how to speak in school right away. So for 2 years, for me, it was very good. Not for my father, because the Soviets suspected that he was a Polish spion. You know, that he is a spy, they call it, you know, that he was in the army and he still wants to spy on the Russians. You know, they were suspicious, and they looked after him. They came to the house, they made to know what we have, so on and so on. So, but he somehow survived. He went to another town, survived in another town. We almost were transferred to, they wanted to take us out to Russia, to Viviesis and Polishes. They wanted to take him away from Poland to Siberia. He somehow escaped because my grandfather had some friends, and he escaped going to Siberia. So we stayed for 2 years nicely at my grandmother's house. I don't remember, so probably. He was not really hiding from, he was hiding from them to take him away to Siberia, yes. But then he came back and forth. So he was actually with us until the end of 1941, June 1941, when the war broke out between Germany, and Germany marched into Poland, the whole Poland. And that was the end of our freedom. 1941, the end of 41. When the Germans walked in, then they started to build the ghetto. We had to be separated from everybody else. And they started a so-called Aktion. With the next year or 2 years, they took away the men. They started taking away all the Jewish families from the whole area that the Germans steadily took away. They came in, I heard the bombs, I saw the German soldier, the tank rolled into the town near my house. I saw them, I escaped them, I was frightened. They were hunting everybody. They took away the men. They took away my mother and her grandmother. My mother didn't want to leave away the house, so she hid with my grandmother in the cellar. But the Ukrainian people, some people knew about the famous cellar in Zborov, and they directed the Germans, here are the Jews. She didn't want to go on the ladder to hide in the attic with my grandmother. She couldn't walk so well. So she went with her mother into the cellar. And this is why the German came in and took her away. I was about 12, 13 years old. And I remained in some outside Zborov. My mother sent me to some country woman to be fed better. We didn't have much to eat. So I was there for a few days, a week or so. I heard the fires, I heard what's happening. I said, no, I have to go to my mother, I have to run. So I went back from that country, and I was looking for my mother, and she wasn't there anymore. And I walked away, and they wanted to catch me. I said, I'm not Jewish, I'm not Jewish. and I just walked into another aunt's house. My father was waiting for me. He said, "This is a happiness inside of a big unhappiness." He took me, says, "Now you're alive, your mother's not." They took her away with everybody, and she was on the big truck, and taken away to Bergen, Belgium with all the others. But some country women told me that they heard her on the truck. She couldn't escape anymore because they were held by the Gestapo. Gestapo took them away, and she was yelling, "Tell my daughter, tell my daughter that I'm here." So that's how she went with them to the camp, and she was burned alive, of course. They were all finished right a few days ago, that at the end of August. But my father was waiting for me. He grabbed me, and he said, "You are here, come with me, and we're going to live outside in the country house," which is another hour, half an hour walk. We walked there everywhere. So I saw just my cousins who survived at that time. They were hiding. The husbands and the sons were taken away, and she said she was the piano teacher from Vienna, because my mother spent many years in Vienna. That's how she spoke German. And this cousin, Tinka was her name, Tinka Auerbach, she was there with me for a day or so. She says, "You escape, you go away, you tell everybody about it, you tell." So I remember that. And then, so I went with my father to a country house, a woman that was a widow. My father and mother rented a room there, so my father could go to camp to work for a while. So he worked there for a few months, and I was living there. The Germans didn't come in there. They didn't know there were any Jews in the country like that. Marina was a serving person. She was working in the apothecary, the drugstore, for my mother's cousins in my grandmother's house, also helping them out. So she was working off and on there, but she had a house outside this town of Zborov, and her husband was taken away to the Russian army and disappeared. So she only remained with her son. And she lived there. She had something to eat because of the country, but she was very poor. Stayed there after especially Germans came in, so they were restricted to many things. And they knew her, and she knew our family. She knew the grandmother's family, and she said my mother wanted to rent a room in her house to be more safe. So they rent a room, and this is the house where I stayed for the next 2.5, 3 years. For a while we was open because they didn't point out that we are Jews. We knew some Ukrainian people. But then the Germans started looking around and looking for the Jewish people to kill them. So the woman, her name is Marina Bartosiewicz, so she took us and said, "I'm going to save your life. Come, we do something." So one night, my father and she was a widow, just as one son and one house, one hut in the country. We're going to do something so you can survive sometime in spite of the Germans coming in looking for you. So my father and she went to a stable. She had a goat in a small stable, and the goat was staying in a little partition. It was as big as one double bed, as long as from me to this wall, as wide as from here to this lamp. It's like one double bed. We're going to dig it out. We're going to put some straw there, so you're going to sit there as long as you can to survive. So they dug it out. They put straw and boards, and the goat was on top of the boards. The goat was on the side and we were inside. We were under the goat. And she was bringing us some food, whatever she can, and taking out to go to the bathroom if she can. But we could not go out because the moment once they saw me, they suspected that she hides the Jews. We could only lie down. I couldn't even sit up like that. They wasn't tall enough for me to sit. I could stand, it's out of the question. I could just like this a little bit, and we were lying down. My father and myself were lying one to next another. She used to bring us candle to read a little bit. There's a newspaper. She was telling us what's happening outside. We bring us some food, bring out the waste to take it out. Sometimes we went out of this little hiding into the stable itself, but never out of the house, never outside. Always in that stable. Oh, I was happy to be able to get out and be in the stable, not on the ground. So we went out. We changed sometimes. We had to change the wash. And she brought some food to us, so we ate something. We ate something in that cellar, in that bunker, all the time. We just ate whatever she had. I was dreaming, it was my birthday, so I was dreaming to get an apple for my birthday. I was dreaming, but she brought us whatever she could. She was very polite and very good for us. And one day, we were sitting there for almost 2 years because the Germans stayed for 2 years at that area, 22 months to be exact. And one day they heard so much about, suspected that she must have somebody, she would bring you food inside and out. So they probably gave out, there were some spies there, and the spies, either Polish, German, whoever they were, they saw it, Ukrainian, they saw that she keeps maybe keeps somebody, because she cooks sometimes. Because all the people around us suspected it, and they knew, we didn't say anything, but the Germans started to question him because he was 12 years old. As you must know, they were giving him whiskey to drink, wine to drink, maybe you will tell us now. And he says, no, she doesn't hide anybody, it's not true. Whoever tells you it's a lie. She cooks for me, not for anybody else. There's nobody there. No, he never told anybody. He could have said very easily. She directed him. She said, don't tell anybody because I'll kill you. But he was but he could have, if he wanted to, very much, because he was still a child. So he could have done it, but he didn't say one word. So they suspected it, and they told Gestapo, go and look for Jews in that house. So they took a dog, and they went with the dog to her house to look for us. It was a dog and 2 Germans, Gestapo. They went around. I was frightened. I was sitting here, afraid to breathe. And they came with the big pole, big cane, and the dogs around them, and they came in and they bang, bang, bang all around. By some miracle, they did not hit the ground where the goat was standing, right outside, maybe closer than you are from me, not so close, like from here to the end of this step. That's where they banged. They didn't bang on the step. Had they banged on the step, they would have discovered us. But the echo didn't come out from that particular place, so they didn't know somebody was there. But we heard them, of course. They couldn't hear us. And they were watching, and they just standing there for a few hours, looking around, banging around the house, around the stable. And we were sitting there frightened, completely with this I remember very well. I was already 14 years old. And then there was a big German tank standing outside of this house. We had a big, it's like big hole in the ground to be able to breathe, get fresh air. So we heard him sneeze, we heard him talk, but he couldn't hear us. When my father was sneezing, I used to close his mouth in my hand. They should not hear him snore or cough. We were talking to each other, this they didn't hear, but they could have heard some louder voice. So we tried to be like this all the time, and I wanted to read something or write something. I used to write something in Polish, the stories or something. So he used to bring us a candle in a little vase and put on the side. I saw the candle and I could write. I always wanted to write and read. I always wanted to imagine. I was a dreamer. I was to write, I'm going to survive. I'm going back to school. I had a hope. I wanted to go see my friends and go to school. I didn't go to school for a few years. So when we came out, then the Germans were withdrawing after 22 months, after 2 years. The whole village was evacuated. We knew about it and we couldn't go out. And the Marina, the woman that kept us, had to leave the house. We saw the house is empty. We didn't afford to eat. We took the last piece of bread with us, and I took something on my neck with us, and we walked out because the bombs were blowing all around us, full of bombs. So we didn't want to be killed in the cellar. So we came out. We thought maybe we'll survive this way because they were withdrawing. The Germans were slowly withdrawing. It was already summer after 2 years. So they stopped bombing, but the Germans were still in the trenches because they were fighting. They were seeing some people walk around, some Soviet or other, they would shoot them. So there were big trenches just outside her house. It was full of mud because it was raining. We said we have to go out of there, as we didn't know. But as we walked out, we saw that we just fell right into the trenches full of German soldiers. And we were talking with them. My father started to talk German. And he said, well, I don't know who you are, but I'm going to take you to the Gestapo headquarters, which was about an hour away walking outside the little Zborów. So they took us and we started walking, and I couldn't walk. And he was pushing out with the gun, with the long gun. You have to walk, pushing me. That was the hardest walk of my life. It was walk that I had to walk and I couldn't walk. He was pushing, go fast, go fast. I couldn't go fast. I could walk as fast as I could. Finally we came already there after 1 hour. I collapsed on the ground and we says, okay. So but the German was already withdrawing. So the Gestapo came out, says, what are you doing here? We escaped because he was sick. I said, we couldn't walk. She says, well, okay, get out of my... He didn't have the time nor the patience to shoot us because he himself started withdrawing. So we remained there. And we walked around slowly. I found something to eat. We had a piece of bread. I picked up some fruit from the tree. And we walked around and we stayed like this for another 3 days or something. We walked around, we found another village. We came to a village, they gave us some milk. Another village woman gave us something to eat. We walked around, we saw horses killed on the road, full of killed horses, killed all around us. Some houses were still not bombed, but they were still there. And then we stayed there, we said, oh, we have to go. Now I could walk a little bit better because I was sleeping in some kind of a bunker that they had away from the Germans. I didn't know the Germans was away. And one morning, my father came, oh, the Russians came in with a big tank. We are free now to go out. So we were not afraid to go out because the German walked away and the Russians came in. He saw the Soviet tank. Okay, we can go out now. We came out and we were so happy to be able to be outside, free. When she saw us, she crossed herself like that. Oh, you're alive, where were you? So we told her where we were. We came to the house, she was so happy. And we were there, and then we walked into the city. We took a little apartment, stayed with her a little bit, and then we were sort of free. He was working, I was walking around, and I was in the city, you know. I was trying to read, starting to do something normal like other people. Slowly, I could I look very probably, but I still could walk, okay. And we stayed there for a while, and then we decided to go back to Warsaw where my father worked before. It was already Poland. It was freed, you see. So we were happy to go back, but I said goodbye to Marinia. She stayed there. I said, Marinia, I promised myself that I'm going to bring you wherever I am. My father happened to have a sister who lived in Canada, and she brought us over. It took a long time, so for 4 years we were still in Warsaw. I went to a children's house. There are many orphans and half-orphans of Jewish kids, some of them not Jewish also, that were formed a little Zaczebie, very nice children's house, and we grew together very much. We became very good friends, and we went to school. I went to high school, to school. We went 2-3 years in 1 year. We were excelling, we were very good in school because we wanted to learn very much. None of us talked about what happened to them during the war. We didn't want to talk about it for years after. We never wrote about it, and never even talked about it to anybody. We didn't want it, we just thought about present and future, what we're going to do, what we're going to study, what we're going to make, what we're going to love or not love, what we're going to read. All this very wholesome. After about 4 years, we went to Canada, but in the meantime, he was working in the Jewish Congress in Warsaw, and because there was no Polish government anymore, it took me about 2 years. I always thought about how can I bring her, how can I bring her. They say, we cannot bring somebody. You have to be either mother, father, or they don't let anybody from Russia. They didn't let anybody to Poland. And she had a son. I said, I'll bring you and your son. I promised her to do it, sending her parcels if I could to Ukraine. She was receiving my parcels, but if I could send. And then I waited for her, and they said, no, we cannot bring her over. So I waited, and what I did is, it occurred to me, I'm going to write to the Canadian government to let her in. I spoke a little English already, and we wrote a letter, my father and myself, we wrote an English letter to the Parliament of Canada. And I said, look, she's not my biological mother, but she's like my mother because I call her Babcia. So. And I didn't think about it for many years until in Canada, of course, I was already in Canada for a while, but then I started to talk about it, what did you do during the war and so on and so forth. And quite lately, last 20 years ago, it was when Alexa was born, maybe years ago, they started talking, why don't you write about it? Why don't you? I didn't want to write, but slowly the things came back to me, and it started only in late ages when I was already 50 years old.
Im sheyesh ba